Well, it's April the 23rd, and a little update on everything that's been happening here. I mean, we've wrapped up the Chauvin trial, and now we have another shooting in Columbus, Ohio, that's got a lot of controversy. By the way, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe if you're on YouTube, and you can forward them to anybody that might be interested, and you can ring the bell for notifications. Also, I don't mention enough, but I'm also on Twitter, also Parler and Gab. So they're all the links to how to get there are in the detail below. That's at Hunt 1954. So easy to find. So anyway, yes. Well, first of all, I guess the Columbus shooting has got a lot of play right now, where apparently some family dispute got out of control, and somebody called the police. I think the original report was that the person shot called the police, but I believe that has now been shown to be incorrect. And by the time the policeman showed up, trying to break it up, a melee was in full swing, and of course, it ended up, of course, with a 16-year-old girl trying to stab another young lady with a knife, and was shot by the police, apparently 4 rounds, and that's created a lot of controversy. Early reports, I think, misstated the situation, and there certainly was an imminent threat to the life of the intended victim, and given the dynamics of the situation, that the choice was either between, I think, shooting or letting the knife assault proceed, at least the first blow or two, So at any rate, that's created a lot of stir. But I think in this case, the photographic evidence is such that I think the policeman is probably going to be okay on this one. Chauvin, I would point out that while I do think that the trial in a lot of ways was unfair to him, you can't deny that the optics of what he was doing was very bad, and probably if it wasn't for all the crowd interacting and heckling, it's likely that probably a lot of what happened wouldn't have actually occurred. I don't think they help matters at all. I think they are also a contributing cause of George Floyd's death by trying to intervene. In other words, if they hadn't have been doing anything, it's quite possible that Chauvin would have noticed the situation with Floyd more closely and realized he was in real trouble, and would at least have rolled him over or maybe given some kind of CPR or something. So that's and another aspect of that one, of course, is the fact that the ambulance, paramedics were rather slow getting there. I mean, because I guess of where they were positioned at the time that they were called, they had to drive back from their home base. I think was fairly close to the site of the incident, but they had to drive back to get there, and even they didn't want to provide immediate aid because the crowd sort of scared them. The jury, I don't know, you could argue that the jury was biased. I think fundamentally the jury was basically a bunch of Democrats, let's be blunt. and as such, they probably agree with the same ideas that come out of the mouth of the Biden administration. So the outcome of the verdict is probably not too surprising given that situation. I was joking around with a friend, the play on Berea's comment to Stalin, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. I was saying, well, show me the jury, I'll show you the verdict. And the big basis, there is, I think, a real basis for appeal. It's probably better than what a lot of pundits are saying. Is in a normal case, I would agree that chance for a successful appeal would be minimal. But in this case, I think there is an added factor. There really should have been a change of venue. It's totally undeniable that the pretrial climate in Minneapolis was just too prejudicial to the defendant. And so I think that's one thing that might happen. Now, the downside of that is simply that he's going to be in the Minnesota judicial system, and we know that's flowed with liberal Democrats. So that's why the higher courts of Minnesota probably won't do much for him. We'll see on that, maybe, possibly. And they also have to be worried about those setting precedents. And sometimes they, of course, would want to have an appeal go forward. So we'll see how they handle that. if it gets into federal court, it's conceivable, depending on what district judge they get, they might actually get some relief, I think, on some kind of constitutional ground or something. But at any rate, he's kind of done, I guess, and for the time being. But the bigger issue, I think, is the Democrat Party, far more than Chauvin's, mistakes or actions, or however you want to look at it, is the fact that the Democrat Party is increasingly becoming the party that's pro-criminal. I think I've made this comments before some time back. I don't know some of my tweets on Twitter I've said this. But they really are pro-criminal at this point. They're trying to end cash bail. They're putting prosecutors in that don't prosecute the criminals, and actually sometimes try to prosecute the good guys. I mean, for instance, people defending their own home, like the case in St. Louis sometime back last year. So you see what I'm getting at, that there is a general tendency of being pro-criminal, because for one thing, the Democrat Party for many, many years has, I would say for at least most of my lifetime actually, has operated on the premise of trying to find some marginalized group and then recruiting them into their voting bloc by doing things for them. I mean, you've seen this with every group that has some grievance. They try to play up this grievance in a way that's really not fair to society in general. Not to say there isn't some basis for many of these grievances, but the idea is that they try to push it to a level that's sometimes absurd. And of course, with the racism thing, which I've criticized before, I mean, this is probably the least racist country in the world, practically, I would think, in a real sense. I mean, well, you might have certain countries that have very small pockets of rather placid minorities that might have a better score in some sense. But in terms of a large country with large, diverse groups, I think this is amazingly not that way. And I'll have to ask another issue is, they always like to use the term systemic racism. And of course, the only system that's in there is a system that's basically anti-discrimination. I mean, the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department is about fighting discrimination and fighting lawsuits. Well, except maybe against Asians in elite colleges. But in general, you see that sort of thing. Whereas, there's nothing like a system that's in place to hold somebody back. So what you're really talking about isn't a system. You're talking about maybe some legacy inertia in some areas. And that's a completely different thing than an active system. And in fact, I think that anything that's systematic is working in the other direction. So it's a real slur on the country, but they're pursuing this in order to retain black votes, which I think they're in fear of losing as more and more African Americans, move up the ladder into society and with better jobs. They're going to pretty much have the same basic interests that anybody else would have in those social classes. And if they stop voting Democrat because of their progress, well, that's going to be bad for them. And that's another reason why they're pushing illegal immigrants. They need to have a large base of poor and disenfranchised people in order to continue to maintain power. Because, so much of what they want to do is kind of crazy, really. And so you have to have people that really aren't really focused on the issues, I think, voting for. But anyhow, I think that's kind of the situation. But overall, you have now that Minneapolis, has gone all out. The police department, the police chief, the training officers, everybody else went all out to get Chauvin convicted. There's 3 more officers on trial. And of course, what's the reward? Well, the Justice Department's going to investigate their policies and practices now, even though they've done everything they can. They've had a defunding by the city council. You have the most left-wing city council mayor you can imagine practically there. And that doesn't matter. They're coming after them too. It's just kind of absurd. But that's what they do. I suppose they're trying to drive the crime rate even higher. And maybe they'll get to the level that they've achieved in Chicago. So that's kind of the situation on that. And of course, the other thing is that police recruitment is down and police retirements are up. So the result is we're having a slow atrophy of our policing. At the same time, all this other pressure is coming on to improve processes and practices. And the net effect, I think, ultimately is going to be situations that are going to be very unlike what happened in Ohio. where the assailant was stopped before somebody else was killed, where they simply stand back and let it happen. You know, I mean, I think that is a real risk. I think if this wasn't Ohio, you know, if it was a different jurisdiction, it might be somewhat different. You know, I mean, you know, certain city of New York, and I guess the state of New Mexico have ended the qualified immunity, which means that increasingly individual police officers in some mishap are going to end up getting sued and bankrupted over some incident they do in the line of duty. And that's, you know, that's going to be another problem that's going to, you know, minimize the recruitment of really good candidates. So I think we're in for some real trouble going forward. And so that's the penalty for voting Democrat, I guess. Anyhow, I'll wrap this up, and for now, and until next time,